Many of you are aware that a large proportion of the world's best carbon frames are manufactured here in Taiwan. But you may not realise that many of the other components found on your bike are also made here. I'm here to visit two massive factories that manufacture pedals, saddles and other components for many of the world's biggest bike brands. We've been given exclusive behind-the-scenes access to learn how these components are made and to learn more about the world of OEM. Let's get to it. Behind me is a factory owned by a company called Velo. Now, despite the sort of innocuous surroundings of what appears to be a Taiwanese residential street, that factory is deceptive. It's absolutely massive. So big that it can produce 8,000 saddles a day and 3 million a year. Velo, as a company as a whole, is huge too. It has other sites, and in total, they're responsible for 50 million saddles a year. These factories that we're visiting today are both based in Taichung in Taiwan, and Taiwan as a whole is a manufacturing powerhouse. Most of the world's semiconductors are manufactured here, and the bike industry is famously located in this part of the world, and also a large part of it is in China. And originally, the bike industry relocated out to Asia because of cheaper labour costs compared to what was in Europe. However, nowadays, there's cheaper labour available elsewhere, but because of the huge amount of manufacturing expertise that's been developed here, it remains. So Velo manufactures its own saddles under the brand name Velo, which are available to buy, but it also manufactures saddles for other companies under OEM, so original equipment manufacturing. Now, OEM is a concept that people within cycling are familiar with. What you might not realise is it happens in pretty much everything. So a great example is cars. You know, Ford don't make the entirety of a Ford. The gearbox, the air conditioning system, the brakes, the wheels, all sorts of stuff, sometimes even the engine, is made by someone else, and then they're simply assembling it. And within the bike industry, this happens because even the biggest bike manufacturers in the world will have expertise and knowledge when it comes to building a frame set, but they just don't have the resource and the capacity to design and build a group set, for example. But not just group sets, wheels and saddles and pretty much everything else that goes on to that frame set. So within the context of saddles, what will typically happen with Velo is a bike brand will come to them and say, we need some saddles for our bikes. And then what they'll either do is choose a model that Velo has developed itself with its own engineering expertise in-house and say, can you brand that up as our saddle for our bike? Or they will come to Velo with their own design and say, can you make this for us? Let's find out what goes on inside. So, for example, these two workers behind me are actually putting together a prototype carbon saddle for a bike brand that you've definitely heard of, but we can't show you. Shh. And here are a load of crates filled to the brim of saddles that are sold on a very well-known brand of indoor bike. I'm covering up the logo with my thumb. Let's go, group of cyclists. The way Velo works is it only starts mass-producing saddles once an order has been placed by a client, usually a bike company, and then it comes into here. This is all the materials warehouse that goes into making all saddles. Now, these are all saddle cover materials, and they tell me that there are over 600 different types. Such is the sort of range and number of options available in terms of the cover that you can choose to put on your saddle. Over 600. There are actually two methods to cut out the saddle covers that go on to the saddle. This one is with a big hydraulic press. I mean, you wouldn't want to get your hand trapped underneath that. And they do that then with a cutting tool that's then cut to size to cut out of the fabric, as you can see here. They also have laser profilers. Now, the reason why they use a press or a profiler is down to the number of saddles being made. For larger orders, they'll machine the tool that's required to cut out the fabric and then use the press, because the press is actually very quick at cutting stuff out. For smaller orders, so your kind of, you know, your carbon railed super saddle that's found on the real top end bikes, they'll use the laser profiler, and that can also be useful for saddles that are made in small numbers, but also changed year on year, because you can instantly change the dimensions by which you cut. You'll have to forgive the noise. This part of the factory is where the saddle rails are made. So the material comes in huge rolls, it's cut to size, and then it's shaped. Now, what's interesting is the different materials. Steel, lower cost option, heavier. You'll notice this is just a solid piece, whereas titanium is a stronger metal, so it means it can be hollowed out and still be as strong as steel, and so that makes it even lighter still. This machine is incredible. It takes this huge spool of saddle rail and feeds it through, and then there's a CNC machine on the end that shapes it to whatever size with absolute precision, and then just cuts it and locks it off at the end. If you've ever wondered how the little scale on the saddle rail is produced, well, it's done with lasers. Behind me here are some injection molding machines that make the foam padding core that goes in your saddle. They're nice and warm as they come out. This is a very special lightweight foam. And something particularly interesting is that's the size of the tooling inside the mold presses there. And then as they come out, the air causes them to expand into this size. And this is a great example of just, well, the engineering expertise that's here in Taiwan, because in order to get that expansion coefficient so that you get the right size end product, very precise calculations are required. Now, when you're producing this many saddles, it's normal to get ones that are sometimes defective in the manufacturing process. However, what they do is recycle those. So this plays into the whole emphasis they have on sustainability and recycling and being as green as possible. So, for example, we've got the foam cores of saddles here that were defective. They grind these up into like a powder, and then this can just be recycled and used again in the manufacturing of other saddles. So having just seen that foam being recycled, I've actually seen that all the saddles being made have a tag on them which breaks down how recycled and how green they are. So it breaks down all the different components. You've got the foam, the cover, the shell, the rail, the bumper, and to what degree on this whatever particular model of saddle it is, that's been recycled. There are different ways of attaching the cover on top of the foam on the saddle, but along here we have an assembly line. So you have the foam, which we've shown being moulded. The backing sort of plate that goes onto, this is an injection molded piece. It's actually made in one of Velo's other factories elsewhere, and then they come here for assembly. What you then have is the covers being applied down these two production lines. They're then sort of applied and crimped into place, trimmed, the rails are attached, and then, well, they just undergo some quality control, and then they're boxed, and you can see a load of boxes of saddles here, ready to be shipped out to the whole world. This is a testing lab that performs various different safety standard tests on the saddles. Now, different parts of the world have different standards that well, products have to comply to, and different ISOs. However, because Velo sells its saddles internationally across the entire world, it just simplifies it and just performs every single test of every single standard on all its saddles so that they can comply to everything. But you can always do better. So this ISO standard pertains that you have to have 1,000 newtons or 100 kilos pushing down on the saddle 1 inch from the back of the saddle, with the saddle clamped at the farthest point on the rail, because that affects the leverage of the saddle. However, they're exceeding the ISO standard, and they're actually going above 100 kilos to 125 kilos. And this reciprocal motion has to be done through 200,000 cycles. So in terms of what affects the price of the saddle that you buy, many people are familiar with the idea of a different rail technology being used. So a carbon rail being the most expensive and steel rails being the cheapest. But what a lot of people don't know about is the actual saddle construction of the upper portion itself. So to illustrate that, we've got three here. This is the most basic technique which you will find on lower cost saddles, where the upper section is just bonded on to the edge in a single machine process. Then you have ones where they're sort of hand applied, and you can get this crimping technique, and then they can be sewn in place to hold it in place. And you see there's a little bit of excess material here from where the cover's been stretched on by hand and then just bonded into place. And then you have this technique, which is found on the most premium saddles, where you can see the finish of the saddle cover around the edge there is very neat, incredibly tidy, and this is called atom shaping, or that's at least what they call it here at Velo. I can't believe the scale of the operation in there. It's absolutely massive. It's blowing my mind. Now, based on what I've seen in there, I'm not at liberty to say all of the brands that Velo is manufacturing for. What I can tell you is that if you have a top-end bicycle that's been made by, I don't know, say one of the 30 biggest bike manufacturers in the world, I'm willing to bet that if it's got an OEM saddle on it, and in some cases not an OEM saddle, it was probably made in there. Now, we've seen how saddles are made. Let's head over to another OEM factory to see how some other components are made. Just 20 minutes away from where Velo is based in Taichung, I've come to visit another factory, and this is owned by a company called Wellgo, who are probably the largest pedal manufacturer in the world you've never heard of. This gargantuan facility behind me produces over 40 million pedals a year. They have a second facility that's in China that also produces over 40 million pedals a year. And the way that production is split is that, again, like I was saying before, a lot of the expertise is here in Taiwan. They make most of their high-end pedals and clip-in pedals here, and a lot more of the flats and more simple pedals that are found on lower-end bikes are made in the China facility. You'll have to forgive the noise behind me. That's because there's lots of CNC lathes whirring away, making pedal axles, because that's the first step in the manufacturing process of a pedal. They take an alloy rod, in this case steel, cut it to length, and then a lathe cut it and machine it into the appropriate shape so that you get your pedal axle. And this differs depending on the type of pedal that's being produced. I've got a finished steel axle here, and I was asking the guys at the factory about the difference in cost between steel and titanium, and they tell me that if you get a chromoly axle, that a titanium one is 30 times the cost in raw materials. So that's why titanium pedals are light but very expensive. It's not just pedals that are being manufactured here, cleats too, in their absolute millions in these various injection molding machines they've got going on here. And then they're also in those injection molding machines making flat pedals such as this. But something cool to point out is some of the innovation within flat pedals and how they've evolved. So just a basic plastic injection molded pedal, something very easy to make, something that we probably take for granted now, but they actually first started doing here in the 1980s, is this sort of composite construction design where you've got a plastic or soft polymer outer sort of piece with then a core and body that's made from a die-cast metal section, which, well, we see this on commuter bikes and children's bikes, you know, all over the world now. And a more recent innovation in flat pedals that are injection molded, in this case out of nylon, is multicolored designs. In this huge part of the factory, we've got loads of CNC milling machines that are actually manufacturing pedal bodies. I'm told that just one of these CNC milling machines costs $150,000 US. We're looking at a lot of money's worth. Machines behind me, I'm quite excited to see because they're die-cast machines, and I've never actually seen a die-cast machine up close. But you know, so many toys I had as a kid were die-cast, so it's cool to see that process. And when in the case of pedal bodies, this is the end result that you get. This is the spree with 2 pedals attached, so you can see how the mold works. And then this is done via a machine, because once it's been cast, it's very hot, but a machine doesn't feel temperature the way us humans do, so it takes it out even when it's hot, and then it can cut it to shape much more quickly. So that's why this process is automated. Behind me here is a big industrial sandblasting machine. It's amazing seeing the stuff come in here. And then, well, when it goes in, it's straight out of the milling machine. You can see it's got all the machining marks on it, and quite a sharp edge on it. What's really cool is the surface finish has been transformed by the fine sandblasting. It's really nice to the touch, and it's rounded off all of the edges. Such an efficient manufacturing process in the way that it's able to do that. It really is. Oh, I'm impressed by that. And then from here, they can then be surface finished. So we go on to the next stage, which is either painting or anodizing. Even OEM manufacturers rely on OEM products. A great example of that is one of the most ubiquitous OEM products in the world, bearings. So the bearings are made by, well, certainly a company called NMB for this particular pedal that this is going in, and they come supplied in these tubes. I think that's really cool. So in this tube, it's just stacked full of them. Look at these cartridge bearings. Loads of them in there, brand new. Similar to what we saw with the saddle rails, we're seeing laser etching being used here to put the logos on the pedals. With all the components made, they're brought to this part of the factory, which is the assembly area. Everything is put together, so you've got the spindle, the body, the bearings, everything, and then they're packaged, ready to be shipped all over the world. Here we can see the workers assembling, well, at the moment they're working on this Expedo thrust, which, well, is a very high-end pedal. You know, you've got a full carbon body, titanium axle, nice little details on this as well. You've got the laser, I know how it's made now, you see, laser etched Expedo logo on the axle, and then this anodized titanium base plate. This portion of the factory is just a huge warehouse where they're boxing up all the pedals to be sent all over the world. And there's a lot of things here I can't show you, and that's because it's a similar OEM story. Wellgo are manufacturing a huge number of pedals for some very, very, very well-known brands that I can't tell you who they are, but you've definitely heard of them. Well, there you have it, a behind-the-scenes look at OEM manufacturing here in Taiwan. A massive thank you to Wellgo and Velo for giving us exclusive behind-the-scenes access. I just found this fascinating, and it's really cool to see the level of sort of manufacturing expertise that exists here. And well, you might not realise it, but you know, companies like Velo that was established by Djeli in 1979, so they've actually been around a long time, and I suspect they'll be around for a very long time after that. Let us know what you think, and if you've got any questions or comments, fire them down in the comment section below. I hope you found this as interesting as I have. I'll see you in the next one. I've got to go ride the Taiwan KOM challenge now, so better get some carbs. Love you, bye.